Should we introduce ourselves again?
I think she knows who we are.
Yeah, do we have to say our letters again, though?
Oh, maybe. Okay, I'm Natalie, and I'm B.
Christy, and I'm A.
Tristan, and I'm E.
Lauren, and I'm D.
Kellen, and I'm C.
Should we just go like A, B, C, D, E this time?
Like
No,
our
Kristen's
posts.
go
I
first,
just
I
don't
was
have my
fine.
post.
Well,
We'll
maybe
look
we
it
should
up, I
talk
guess.
about all first, because that was the first one we were supposed to do was
Let's just go
everybody.
down the list.
Yeah, that's what she's saying.
Except all of us had pretty much the exact same thing and all.
Yeah.
We can still talk about it though.
Mm-hmm.
What do we think of those statistics?
I thought the question was funny though when I was like, why, like, should we look at their deficits or their assets? And I'm like,
Well,
I mean, I think it's kind of obvious.
Yeah, I think it just means should we look at where they're lacking or where they are improving.
That
So
was a
it's
lot more.
like, should we look at what they're lacking so that we can help them improve, or should we look at what they're improving so that we can encourage them to keep doing better?
Right. Yeah.
So,
Or
I
to
think
see
that's
like
what
what
it
they
meant.
bring to the table.
yeah.
I'm gonna open the questions.
The
I'm gonna try to do that too.
honestly, the statistics like shocked me. I didn't realize that there were so many people not graduating from high school. I guess that
Yeah.
shouldn't shock me anymore, but still, when I hear stuff like this,
Every time I read statistics about people not graduating, it surprises me.
Mm-hmm.
because I think especially for like our culture and like just like having that like power and privilege, like it's expected that we were going to graduate from high school. It
Yeah.
wasn't like an if, it was like a you will
Yeah.
graduate from high school. So it's so different.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, how do they affect the way I might teach and utilize community partnerships with the growing population of Latino students? Those statistics, how do they like affect that?
I like what you said in your like post when you're like, oh, being a white, female, middle class, like we definitely have to depend on community members to actually understand and get to know and like
Yeah.
fully I don't know, understand the students because we don't have any
We don't have the
experience in
That
it at
background,
all.
yeah.
No background at all.
Right.
Yeah.
And to be like a good ally, you have to know when to like ask for help and
Mhm.
stuff.
Mhm.
I
Yeah.
remember, or I took this class, Bridging Barriers with Migrant Youth, last quarter, and one of like our class motto was step up, step back, or step forward, step back. And like knowing when to like speak up and like knowing when like it's your turn to talk, but also knowing what am I trying to say? Knowing like when it's another person's time to speak and like you should like sit back and listen, and that's what that kind of reminds me of, like calling upon like other people when you don't have the answers.
Well, it's like no one's gonna be an expert in every culture or anything. Like you can only really be an expert in your own culture, and even then, only like a little bit. Like you gotta use the community. It takes a village to raise a child. I think it's the same.
Yeah. I've
Wanna
heard
be
that
super
quote so many
cliche?
times last quarter.
Yeah.
How might this article inform the way we think about community assets map?
I just was thinking about like Sterling Meadows and how every time I think about Sterling Meadows, I usually think about the homework club just because that's the part that I like volunteered at or did my service learning at. And I just think, wait, what was the question?
How might this article inform the way we think about our community assets map?
Everything I was saying just like totally left my brain.
That's unfortunate.
Well, the population at Sterling Meadows has like that high ELL percentage.
Yeah.
And
Oh, I was just thinking like the director there, he's like really involved in that community and he like builds relationships with all the students and like gets like uses like what they can bring to the group and everything and their ideas and stuff, so that's just what I was thinking.
Just like knowing that like incorporating their culture into what we're teaching instead of like forcing our culture on them. I mean, obviously that's really obvious, but like I don't know where I was trying to go with that. With the assets thing and the deficits, like focusing on the good parts of their cultures and incorporating them into our teaching will obviously make them way more interested. It's like in the high school Tucson.
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 Sorry.
That
Sorry
one.
for me.
Like the kids were so engaged because it was stuff that they actually cared about learning.
Yeah.
when I was reading, I was thinking like about the deficit theory that we talk about a lot. I think in Compass Campus especially, but it like says that students who do not fit the normal mold are like wrong and they need to be fixed. And then the students, like, it reminded me of our community assets because like the people coming from these places have all different walks of life and are different and are uniquely talented. And so it's our place as educators not to shape our students to be the same individual, but to take the individuals and shape them into better versions of themselves.
I like
So
that.
So I like that the community is like not trying to like Americanize themselves. They're trying to just build themselves up and strengthen themselves as a community.
Right. Which is what that school was doing.
Mm-hmm. I thought that the article helped like build, kind of building off of what you just said, helped us build the assets portion of the community assets map. So it helped like outline some assets that we might see already in the community, so that when we go visit it, we can see this is what we might want to look for, and then it'll help us bring to light like some of the things that might have been there that we might not have noticed in the beginning if we hadn't read the article.
Totally. Well, I'm just like with our own students, like asking them like, oh, do you have like a homework program that you could go to after school, instead of like forcing them to come to our class after school if they don't feel comfortable or whatever, but like recognizing that there are other like ways to help a student other than just you, and like calling upon like a community and stuff. So
Yeah.
For sure.
So considering that we want to look at assets of the community, what are some programs and services and capacities that might help Latino students who are struggling with dropping out, getting low-income jobs, testing, etc.? Like, what are some of the specific programs and services that we can think of? Does anyone have any ideas?
at our own school or at our
Anywhere,
own,
Just any ideas.
anywhere.
Just like any ideas of some.
Yeah, I feel like any homework club or any type of thing that gets them to like do their work is, I don't know, helps them, because I feel like a lot of times students like that, it's not that like they know what they're learning and they can do it, it's just they
Need some accountability?
they need some accountability, and sometimes they're like too busy, like if they're an older sibling like watching over the household, or like it can be really difficult for them to get it done. And I mean, I feel like homework shouldn't be that big of a thing, but if they're not participating in that, then they're not most likely participating in school, and then they drop out. And
At the school I work at, we have like a portion of the day in the library where students who speak Spanish can come and play computer games that have English and Spanish words. And the para speaks Spanish, so when they're struggling with the English concepts, she'll like say in Spanish what it means and how to like understand it.
Yeah.
But it is really nice, and there's only a couple of them, so it's not like she's like everywhere. It's just the kids, and they're allowed to work together.
Oh, that's so
But
fun.
but it's also a pull-out class, like it's
Yeah.
pull-out time, which is not always the best, like LRE for the students.
Sure. Sorry. I just have one more thing. Drawing on last week's reading, when I read about Tao, in regards to like getting into gang relations and stuff like that, what he needed, it seemed like the teacher thought, was he needed a community that he could go to, so that he didn't end up in this other community that wasn't as good for him. So I think that also in general, just having a solid community that you know will support you is really important for like a child's development, especially academically.
It's literally exactly what I was about to say.
Okay,
Like,
cool.
the words straight out of my mouth and yours.
I also feel like having like an active interest in that student's life is really helpful, because if they feel like you don't care about them, then it's like, what's the point in trying to graduate or trying to do my homework or whatever. But if you like seek them out and talk to them about their life, then they feel better.
Awesome. So why do we need to look at assets rather than deficits? And how might these be incorporated into our classrooms in order for students to thrive? We kind of already answered
we
that.
already
answered that,
Yeah.
yeah.
Okay. That was just the next question.
We're on
Awesome.
one now?
Yeah, we're on
Jigsaws?
the jigsaws.
Okay. I'm A, and mine literally said to reread the first 2 pages. And it says, how might the capital that they bring with them increase the educational and economic opportunities under structuring opportunity? How does educational background and poverty? So it was just like,
What does it mean by capital?
that's it, it's in parentheses too, so I was like, I wonder if it's like, because capital usually means like monetary, like wealth.
Yeah.
So it's like, I guess what assets is what it kind of sounds like would they bring with them to increase educational and economic opportunities? So like, what do they bring to a community when people transition, I guess? So I kind of just read it and then rolled with it. And I said, it talks a lot about Latino population mostly comes from immigrating families, and they're all from different walks of life. So some immigrate to escape persecution in countries, and some are moving to achieve the American dream. So they're all coming from different places. It said, Latino youth under 18 make up 35% of the entire population of Latinos in the U.S., but they're also like the highest percentage for dropping out, living below poverty, and facing racism. And it said that it talked a lot, and this is where I kind of made this connection. We talked about Agbu's theory of the immigrant minorities versus the involuntary. And so all of the Latinos that immigrated had, like, and I don't know how they can kind of make this generalization, but they said they had higher attitude, like more positive attitude towards school, and they tend to have just like more interest in school. And then those that lived here and were born in the U.S. Took, more risks in their health and schooling. They stopped going to classes. They had lower attitudes, negative attitudes. So it kind of just reminded me of Agbu's theory, and then it talked about a lot about how the longer you live in the U.S. and the more generations of your family that are Latino that live here, the more their health deteriorates, the more they hate being here and hate doing schooling. So I said, like,
It's really sad.
it was so sad. And so I guess just like as instructors, it's important that no two students will be alike, even if they come from the same ethnic group. And we should take action for Latino students who face daily injustice by working to represent them in their culture and history in the classroom to increase engagement. That was a lot of words. What do you guys think? It was just reread the first 2 pages.
Yeah.
Pretty much the article.
Yeah.
I feel like especially coming from a place of privilege, like it's hard when I read an article to not make vast generalizations about a population. And I really think like, well, if I can't make these generalizations, then I should take each student as an individual. And then it's kind of like, where do I put this article in my brain, kind of? Because it's not a generalization of a population, it's facts that'll help me do something better.
Maybe they're just like ideas to jump off of, like, this is something that might be true. Let's see if this is.
Yeah, something to think about maybe.
It's helpful
Yeah.
to consider,
Yeah. That's it.
Yeah.
I'm still not quite sure what capital means.
I think it's kind of just what will they bring.
Right.
What
Like
ideas
their
they have.
experiences
Yeah.
and ideas.
Yeah, that's what I was kind of.
Like what their life story brings to them.
And so
Like,
I'm not
that's a
sure if
really
I
cool,
answered
like,
it well.
background.
But
I think so.
okay.
Like people who've been to schools in different countries, like come back with the most amazing knowledge and like ideas of how like different systems can run and stuff. Like if we could incorporate some of those ideas and like knowledge that they have from different schools in different states and different countries into our classroom, like it would be super awesome.
I definitely thought that when we were watching those videos from Tucson.
Exactly.
I was like, this is beautiful.
I love the teachers. The teachers
I
are
know,
so
they're
great.
very
It
great.
reminded me of oh wait, none of you were in my math class. Well, I went to this Roosevelt Elementary, and there's the Mr. Canaris, and he reminded me a lot of them, and I really liked him. So it's cool. That's random.
Your post reminds me of this analogy that I heard one time about like white privilege, and so like for example, there's a fish trying to like swim upstream, but like obviously he's having a hard time, and then there's a monkey in a tree, and he's like watching the fish swim upstream, and the fish is like analogous of like marginalized people, and then the monkey is analogous of like dominant society. And so the fish is like having a hard time swimming upstream, and the monkey sees this, and so he grabs the fish out of the water and puts it at the top of the stream, and the fish is like, hey, like, why'd you do that? I didn't need your help, I was doing this fine on my own. And the monkey was like, well, I saw you struggling so much, I just wanted to help you and like get you there faster. And the fish was like, okay, well, if you would have like gotten in the water with me and like swam with me while like encouraging me, that would have been a lot more helpful, and I would have done it on my own. Isn't that a good analogy?
That is a really good analogy.
Good analogy.
I've never heard that before.
Which class did you get that in?
It was the Bridging Barriers with Migraine. I would really recommend that.
Sounds like a good class.
Do you want to move on to
Yeah.
1B? So mine was, what did Pyler versus Doe do for undocumented students? How does being undocumented affect access to education? What are some statistics of migrant families? How does this speak to their educational experiences, and what are the effects of late entry to school. So lots of questions.
I have a
So
quick question.
yeah.
Is undocumented the same thing as unauthorized?
Yes.
Yeah.
Completely.
Yeah, so Pyler versus Doe was a decision that they made in court to, they ruled it unconstitutional to deny undocumented students public education. So every undocumented student is given the right to public education in the United States now. And then how does being undocumented affect access to education? So there, like, lots of undocumented students have like lots of fear and anxiety every day about like being found out or their family members being found out, and so they don't do as well in school typically. And then they also have limited access to post-high school education, so anything that they would have to apply for a scholarship or a grant or that kind of thing for, they have like limited access to, except for there's this thing called WAFSA, Have you guys ever heard of that? I learned about that in the same class I've been having. And it's FAFSA, but for people without papers. So
Ooh, I like that.
yeah.
That's cool.
So yeah, good to know. So they can get grants through that because they don't get loans because they typically like are higher needs, so they just get grants most of the time. Anyway, fun fact. And then, what are some statistics of migrant families? Or did I learn anything there? If I wrote something in my notes. What are the effects of late entry to school? So, like late entry to school, they're behind all of their peers. They may be behind in language, so they may be behind in content area, that kind of thing. The thing that I mentioned about undocumented students is that their parents typically care like a great deal about their school, but they don't have the time or energy to like come or the resources to come to school every day or whenever and meet with the teacher and like show that like other parents may, and then they don't have the education to sit down with their kids and help them with their schoolwork. So.
One of my teachers told a really cool story about when she was in a school, someone she worked with had a lot of parents who weren't able to make it just because of socioeconomic stuff that they had to deal with. And so what he did, I'm not saying this is something that every teacher will be able to do, but what he did for that year was for the parent-teacher conferences, he had a bunch of his friends like carpool parents like
No way.
into the school.
That's awesome.
Yeah, to meet with him.
too.
Yeah, they did. They all came. They're all
That's so
super
awesome.
excited. Yeah, and he got like an extra translator so that he could meet with more people. And
That's
stuff
so
like that.
cool.
Yeah, it was a really
Yeah.
cool story.
Another thing to consider about like parents of like marginalized groups coming to school is that since there's like so much institutionalized racism in our like school system, they may not have had a great experience in school, so like they may not feel comfortable coming back to school. The LU or Lucille and Barger Elementary School in Burlington has that issue all the time. They used to have this expectation that when a student got suspended, they were suspended until the parent came in and had a meeting with the principal. And that wasn't working because these students were suspended for a really, really long time. And then they ended up doing like more research on it, and they found, the parents don't want to come into school because they hate the school system because of their like bad experiences in the
they're just-
school.
And making it worse by like, you
Right.
can't come to school again.
Yeah.
Obviously, that's not the only reason why parents aren't coming in, but that's one of the reasons.
That's interesting. I never thought about that.
It's like, it might be a little bit off, but like students that like have things confiscated or whatever, and like your parents have to come collect it. Like if you have a student whose only means of communication with their family is like a phone or something, and the phone is confiscated, and the parent has to come pick it up, like Like, what if they can't come?
Right. Or if you call the home number to their home and you say all of these instructions in English, but the family doesn't speak English.
See? Okay,
Some
mine
money
was.
questions, guys.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, yeah.
Start thinking about
Okay.
it.
Well, in academic engagement, you might think of some because it was it was loaded, but it was like really short. So basically, mine was just to like define academic engagement, and it has like talk about 3 dimensions, and then how it works with power dynamics. So I'll just go through that. So academic engagement has kind of like 3 levels they were talking about. Now I was talking about highly engaged is interested and highly engaged in academic material. Moderately engaged was may complete basic requirements but not to his or her full potential. And disengaged was learn significantly less than if they were engaged in the materials and perform significantly below their academic potential, and it has generally multiple failures, which I thought was strong. Very true. 3 dimensions of academic engagement were cognitive, which was intellectual curiosity about academics, and the behavioral engagement was actually engaging in behaviors that lead to like doing well in school, so attending, participating in the school and stuff like that. And then relational engagement was supporting meaningful relationships with adults and with peers. So those all go into academic engagement. And cognitive, this is just a side note, but cognitive and behavioral engagement are the direct manifestations of engagements, while relational engagement is the mediator of these engagements. I was confused on what that meant.
Yeah, do teachers use these to like define their students?
I
Or
was
who uses
confused.
this?
Yeah, is it supposed to be, is it like one student is one thing, or is it
I
like
think
all
that's,
3?
I think that's a great.
Maybe
Oh, they're all
question?
3. So
All
like
3 at
cognitive, behavioral, and relational
But it's just the
make up
level of
academic, and that's like what a student's academic engagement would be. So all those 3 things affect. There's a diagram in the book that I don't have that shows like how these things affect all 3 parts of academic engagement. So
is it like there'd be like the cognitive, behavioral, relational, and then like if it's like a scale, and then over here is like disengaged, moderately engaged, highly engaged, and if like it reaches like
that's what I thought, but I
That would make
didn't
sense.
really explain. But that's my picture of what it was.
yeah.
And it just had like social, societal, and like all these different factors on this side of like the diagram, and it had arrows going into cognitive, behavioral, and like just a box that was called academic engagement, and then that affected the student, and so it was kind of like I thought they could have like explained it better in the article, and I got pretty confused. So
That
might be a good
sounds
muddy
muddy.
question. Yeah, it
I
sounds
know.
very muddy.
I don't know how to write this thing, so I don't
Yeah.
I can't remember all the words, so I don't know how to write down the muddy question.
It's academic engagement, and then the 3 dimensions of academic engagement.
Were
like,
cognitive,
so,
behavioral,
yeah.
and relational. So how those affect the student directly? Is that our
How they
question?
affect the student directly.
I feel like we have
or like
multiple questions.
yeah, I feel like there's a couple about it because they could also like a big question could just be like, who uses this? What
Yeah.
are we using this for?
How
Yeah,
would
what
a
is
teacher
it
use
directly?
this in
How
their
would we
classroom?
integrate this?
Because,
Like,
okay, even if you have it,
what is this
what are
called?
you doing?
Yeah. Well, that's part of the thing. Is later in here I talk about academic engagement as showing power dynamics through individualistic structures.
It's like benchmarking.
So yeah, it's kind of like. What did I write exactly?
It's not formulated to benefit those with good
Oh yeah,
economic
thank you. You're reading mine. So it's not only is it formulated to benefit those with good economic standing, but it doesn't give much guidance for those who find themselves in at-risk factors, which is what the factors they showed was.
Okay.
And it was basically the factors, which were like negative factors, engaged with academic development and going with the student. And I was like, okay, well, given this, like, now what?
Yeah.
Like, you're showing me that the student is meant to fail? Is that what you're trying to
Yeah.
tell me? And I just, like, didn't, it made me kind of angry. Because I was like, if a teacher looks at this, they're going to be like, okay, and this student will fail, and this
This
student
will
will fail.
Yeah.
So
Like-
how would a teacher use these academic factors
To like help
to
actually
better the
help
instruction?
Like
Yeah,
to
I don't
like
even
find
know.
assets instead of deficits or something. Like I don't
Yeah.
know.
That's
it sounds
exactly
like
what it did. It
Yeah,
found the
it found-
deficit.
Yeah, it sounds like it's like a census bureau thing that's like trying to find like where students are failing in class and like how much they're connected. And so it's like instead of using this for school, we just send it to someone so they can put it in a study and say
It
that
was really
these kids are
weird.
failing.
Interesting.
How about we
Maybe
just call this a muddy section?
We have a muddy chunk here.
Are you writing this down?
Yeah.
You
really
don't have to.
messily.
Like, cause when I post the video, I'll just like
Okay.
right under
I'm just
it.
trying-
No, I was just less work for you.
I don't have any access to internet, so I don't know why I was writing this down anyways either.
Yeah, that's all I had for C.
Okay.
Move on to D.
Now that we're all thoroughly confused.
Yeah. Sorry,
That's
everyone.
okay. We found some mud. It's fine.
Let's find some more mud. Oh, I'm D.
Yeah.
That's why you're all looking at me. I was like, why isn't anyone talking? Okay, I need to open mine. Identity formation. I'm sorry, guys. Don't. Oh, it's right here. Look at how fast I opened it.
When learning about it.
Okay. No, I need to read the question first. Okay. Identity formation. What is meant by the hyphenated self, and how does the conceptual model of academic engagement inform one's sense of self? Okay, I was very confused about what the hyphenated self actually was because
really?
I think what you wrote was
the article didn't actually explain it. I just kind of like deduced stuff from it, so it was a little confusing. But I think it's I think it's like when a student thinks themselves like as African American instead of as an American child, like they're focused on the fact that they're African American, like that just makes them think like a whole different set of expectations and a whole different like I don't know, culture that they're part of. But yet they're just in the American education system. There's not an African American education system. And I talked a lot about how sometimes that will make students feel left out or like they don't belong in the community, is when they have that I'm African American, which is great, like be proud of it, but I don't know, sometimes there's and then I also
Oh, sorry.
No,
I was just gonna. Could you read the question again? Or not? What it was?
it says, what is meant by the hyphenated self and how does the conceptual model of academic engagement inform one's sense of self?
Okay.
Lots of words. And they talked a lot, I think this was in our section, it might have been in the section. Did you guys read about the little boy from Nicaragua who was
Oh yeah.
Yeah.
I don't think so.
I just kind of skimmed it.
Okay. Well, they talked a lot about how, like, kids from, like, Nicaragua or whatever, like, obviously they have black skin, but they would come to school and be considered, and they'd come to school and be considered, like, they would think that they're Latino coming in, because, like, that's where they're from Central America, like, they speak Spanish and stuff, but they would come to school and be categorized with this different, like, racial minority, and how that can be really, really, really confusing, because then they're, like, they're not even being identified as the country or something that they came from, like, they're being thrown into another one just because of, like
Like they're being like labeled as African American.
Yeah,
yeah,
like,
even though
identify as
they're-
Latino.
Yeah, even, and they were talking about how there's a huge population of kids from like Central America that happens to, and those kids are like 7 times as confused as the other kids.
There's a
yeah.
rap song about this, just saying. I listened to it
what's
in my
the
African
Yeah, what
American
rap
studies
song?
class.
I
I
wanna
don't
know.
know what it's called, we just listened to it and talked about it in my class.
So the hyphenated self is like when you wrote it here, you said like race and then where you're from or where you live. So like
Yeah, I think-
African American.
yeah,
Or Latino American. Or
Yeah.
something like that.
Yeah, it makes sense. It's hyphenated.
But like, I can't.
Thank you.
But yeah, that could be a muddy question too, because I'm still a little like.
No,
fuzzy.
me too. And I read that section of the article like 4 times, and I didn't come up with a conclusive like
Like,
what
definition
is
also,
hyphenated
yeah.
self.
So could it be like, what's a strong definition for the hyphenated self?
Yeah,
Um,
I'm not gonna know.
and it talked about it a couple times. It like mentioned hyphenated self in the article, but it never like explicitly said what it was.
It's like when you give an
okay.
abbreviation and you never say what the abbreviation is.
They did it one time in the article, and I was like, I don't know what this is. And then I
help.
keep going.
so that made me think this story, like when people like look at you and like assume your identity and stuff. Someone that I know, what is like Hawaiian, and when she was in school, this was like a while ago, they took all of the Native American kids out of the classroom and like had like a talk with them, and they told her to come, and like they were going around the room and everyone was saying like, oh, like my name is so and so, I come from this tribe, and they got to her and she was like, I'm Hawaiian. And they were like, oh, sorry, we didn't mean to call you out. And so then she like went back to class, and there was like all these white kids in class. She was like, I don't fit in here either.
It's so weird.
That makes me think of like, actually, was it for this class, the Third Culture Kids video? I watched the Third Culture's Kid video. I'm pretty sure it was for this class.
It might have been for this class.
And
Oh.
it was like talking. It was like a 9-minute video, and it was talking basically about that kind of thing where
Oh yes, yeah, totally.
where all
I
the
know.
Yeah.
all the students. I just thought that video was really interesting. So like, well, I mean, I was born here, but I moved here, and technically, like, my blood is of this, but I don't actually live there, and I don't call that home, and I don't call this home, and it's like, just like really crazy. They don't really know what to identify as. I thought that was interesting. But that's my favorite.
It also talked about how, like, especially kids that migrate here when they're older, or that are like immigrant children, often find themselves torn between like two different cultures, like their parents' country of origin culture, like origin, origin, same thing, it's been a long week. Like they find themselves torn between the two cultures and they don't really know which way to go. Sometimes they just get stuck in the middle, and that's where like games come in, because it's like this whole group of people that understands where they're coming from.
Yeah.
Well, and that also like brings about people telling them, well, you're not fully this culture.
Yeah.
And then there's a confusion of identity.
Exactly. And to answer the question about the sociologists and what do they believe about this, they believe that it really brings like ambivalence and then worse like hostility in adolescents of color, because they get mad that they're not part of any specific group. And then the next part of it is, it says, how have you been socially and culturally shaped, and how do you think that affected the experiences you had in school? And that's just a little part about like, we were raised in like middle class white America, like what are our experiences? And I mean, maybe we weren't raised in there, but that's basically, yeah.
I was in Kent, so it's like the most diverse.
Yeah.
part, so it was like really nice that like I grew up with like Brooklyn and Vanderbilt and Cicero and like all my cool friends. And so it's
I
like-
went to a private school for all of my childhood, and there like were not students of other colors there, like at all. Like the entire school was white, and this was from like K through 8th grade. So I remember when I got to high school and there were like students of different colors in my classroom, I was like, oh wow, there are other people that aren't white in my state. Like I didn't know that these people even existed in this state, and I was so shocked, and I had to like start from ground zero there, and like I was super like, this is so cool. And I think it was a disadvantage because obviously I didn't know anything. I was like, I have no idea what to like who these people are, but that's really cool if they were here. But I also didn't have some of like the stereotypes or like negative thoughts about them that they sometimes grow up thinking of, because I hadn't seen any like bullying against them or any racism ever in my life, so I was just like, woohoo, open slate. But at the same time, like, I don't know, I have a lot to
I
learn.
met two girls my freshman year who I was really good friends with, and we went out on like a trip once, and we drove past a man wearing a turban, and both of them freaked out because they'd never seen anyone like that.
Exactly.
And they were like, what is on his head? Like, who is that? Like, there are people that look like that. And I remember just being like, what are you talking about? Like, that's just a person.
There was a girl in my freshman year math class, like my first period class ever of my new brand new high school, and what do they call it, the hijabs?
The hijabs?
Yeah, hijabs. She was wearing one of those, and I like didn't know what to do at all. I went home and I was like, Mom! And she was like, it's okay. And then I like, and then I like learned all about it. So I think that we need to like teach kids about what the different cultures mean and why it's okay that there's diversity and stuff in there, because like I had no idea.
It's imperative to like start talking about that at such a young age, because I don't know if any of you remember this, but I remember asking questions about like skin color all the time as a kid and being shushed. And there's nothing like that's like our culture. Like almost everyone white in our society has been trained to do that. Yeah. But when you shush little kids, it makes it not okay to talk about it at all. And yeah, that's what I grew up kind of similar, like Puyallup, very white suburban town, and I wasn't exposed to anything like that until I got to college, and I was like, people talk about race, like what?
I grew up in the exact opposite. I grew up in like a poorer part of Seattle, and so that's where I was from. And then I moved to Bellevue,
No.
which is like
Yeah.
like there was probably 2 African American students and like 1 Mexican student that went to my school, and like going to that, I was like, what is this place? And I was of low economic standing, and so I could not relate to anyone at the school, and so it was like, who are you people? It was like another country almost. It was so weird, and it's just right across the water.
Right.
It's kind of like my friend, actually my roommate Lena. She moved here to go to college here from Chicago, and so in her school she was the minority. Like almost everyone was like either Mexican or African American, and so she, like the whites were minority. Like there were like 3 white people in her class, and so when she came here, she's like, why are there so many white people?
And
And
then
then
my boyfriend growing up in China, he was like,
Yeah.
I was the white guy.
yeah, and she's like, the biggest thing that her mom told her that she was gonna have to get used to was like not being the minority anymore, which I thought was so interesting because I just never think of that. Yeah.
Yeah. It's interesting. Chicago has one of the worst PTSD symptoms for youth in our entire country because of race and gangs.
I bet. Wow.
Chi-town,
She calls it Chirac.
Chirac. That's where that comes from. Chirac, because so many youth has PTSD. It's hard to be so formative.
Okay,
Yeah,
okay.
Oh, my turn?
Yes, it's your turn.
Okay. Mine was just talking about social mirroring, which, so basically they did this research study where like they had a whole bunch of little, like, or not little kids, they had a whole bunch of like youth, immigrant youth, and they asked them a question to like fill in the blank, and that's like most Americans think, and then like what they think about immigrants, because they're trying to see if they pick up on that kind of thing. And there was one 14-year-old boy. There was several of these, but there was one 14-year-old Mexican boy, and I feel like he kind of summed up what all the kids were saying in the one. He said that most Americans think that we are lazy, gangster, drug addicts that only come to take their jobs away. And that was just like so sad to read because there was like several of them, and like even younger kids who were saying things like really similar to this, like they think we're just gangsters or they think we're just drug addicts, and it was just like so sad to read. And then it was basically just talking about how so they have that image of how people perceive them, so then that kind of mirrors on their self-worth. So because people have negative views on them, they like their self-worth lowers, and they it's hard for them to think positively about themselves. And even like when their parents try to provide positive mirroring for them because their parents care about them, it's usually not enough to compensate for peers and media, because they just get that all the time, and that influences their academic engagement, because since they're in, like, they feel like they're in a toxic environment where they can't like be who they are, then they don't want to invest in the school because they don't want to be there. So, and that was pretty much what it was about.
That's a lot like what Trump, talks about how you respond to a lot of like kind of racist remarks, you know. And he's like, they're like this, like I'm gonna fix your jobs, and like, no.
He's so horrible.
I had a nightmare about him the other day. I was like swimming in a pool and he was there, and I woke up sweating. I was like, everything is bad.
Did you see his like pep rally with the girls
Yep.
who were singing
The propaganda.
Oh,
yeah.
what are they doing?
There were like 3 little like white cheerleaders, blonde
insane.
cheerleaders, and they were singing like Trump propaganda basically.
It's terrifying.
Yeah.
What was it?
They're
It was
just wearing like American.
Yeah, they were like, let's go get them, and like
Let's defeat
the
the enemies.
enemies, and like, and then the video I watched after I watched the whole thing, I watched a second video, and it compared like that video to what's that movie that came out that was from about like North Korea? It was like the thing,
Interview?
the interview. Yeah.
Because
It
you
compared
compared
it compared it
to a comedy about.
yeah.
Oh,
About it
that's
was
so
because there was a
harsh.
little girl in that movie who was saying like really awful propaganda, and it it compared what they were saying to what she was saying, and it was
Wow.
basically just like doled down exactly the same thing.
That's so sad
Yeah.
considering that is a comedy that was just supposed to be terrible.
That's like in Schindler's List too, like in the beginning when the girl's like, "Bye Jews, goodbye Jews."
Yeah.
It's like, it's so scary. And to feel like, to bring it even back, like the 14-year-old boy, like having to already face injustice
Yeah, and there were younger
racism like
kids
that.
too that were.
Yeah.
They just like already picked up on the fact that like they just think that we're bad and they just come here to like steal your job.
That's weird.
I know I've told you guys this before, but my boyfriend is a psych major. Have I told you that before?
No.
He tells me all these cool things about like race and how like the brain reacts to race and stuff. Not race, just things in general, like politics, also race, because he knows I'm interested and stuff. Anyway, so he told me that he was looking at this study in one of his classes about like the difference between the brain in like people who are more conservative and then the brain in people who are more like liberal side. And liberals have this part of their brain that's like more developed to like critically think about, or not critically think, but like compare two things, like comparing skills. And then more like conservative brains have like typically, not always, but typically have this thing in their brain that's more developed, that's like a fear receptor. And so they can like, they like consider fear more than the brain. It's like more on the liberal side.
I mean, that would make sense. Yeah.
Yeah, that makes. I was like, whoa. Anyway,
With your eyes exactly that big.
Yeah.
Do we live to 2 then?
Yeah. So just living in the shadows, right? Sorry, it's living.
Yeah, growing up in the shadows.
Growing up in the shadows.
And then I have the same like first part as B, by the way.
Oh, okay. The macro.
Yeah, I had all that same thing, so
I did
we
too.
just cover that. Oh, you did? Okay, well.
Okay.
And then I just had to elaborate
that
on what you
much.
said. Basically,
Right.
it was something else. So.
I think we could just do like our actual jigsaw parts of it.
So here's A. Sorry, just jumping in. Here's A. Mine was to briefly describe the different types of documentation statuses. And these are the ones listed. Stop me when you hear a repeat. Unauthorized, mixed status, unauthorized, and interrupted rights of passage. Yeah, so I was like, okay, and so I went through the article and I found something that sounded like it, but it was a little different, so I just went with that. I thought it was just an error. So unauthorized is individuals who live in the country without legal authorization, and it said that undocumented is another term, but they don't like using that at all. Because it's, like, I guess the article was just talking about how it's really negative, and it's like, instead of saying, I don't know how it was
Undocumented versus unauthorized sound.
they sound
pretty much
both
the same.
negative, yeah. And so they just said that
Sounds better than.
I feel like undocumented sounds better than unauthorized. Like you're not authorized to be
And they
here.
both sound better than illegal.
Didn't the article tell us to use the word unauthorized, or is that just my section of
it
it?
said use unauthorized.
Yeah, I wanted to
Okay.
use instead of undocumented.
Yeah, and so
That's
it
what I
said,
thought.
individuals who live in a country without legal authorization, these individuals are not citizens, do not have visas, and do not have permission for long-term residency. Mixed status, at least one member of the family is unauthorized, so one parent or the other, or both parents, or a single-parent household with legal children, or one sibling that was born outside the country while the younger sibling was born here, and so on.
This is confusing.
Where? 1% of the family.
Yeah. There's one person in the family, and it just gave examples, because it was only a 5-word sentence. And then I found one that was called Citizen Children of Unauthorized Parents, which is exactly what it sounds like. That were children who were born here after the unauthorized parents entered the U.S. in an unauthorized way.
So they are
Citizens, because they were born here. Yeah, and so it made a point to say it does not guarantee the parent's citizenship. It's just because their kids were born here.
So there could be some overlap with these three groups.
And then there's one more, which I was super confused about, and I still don't know, so this could be another muddy question. And it was called Interrupted Rites of Passage. And basically, when I broke it down, it said unauthorized status limits youth to access to basically have expected normal ways of living in the U.S., like quinceañeras, like
So we can't have those things?
that's what was confusing. What is it? Bar mitzvah, stuff like that. So it said their rites of passage, they can't really experience them in the same way of their peers because of the unauthorized status. And I couldn't figure out why they couldn't experience it.
Yeah.
Because, okay, so they're unauthorized, therefore they can't have their traditions because it would let people know that they're not authorized to live here, even though it wouldn't.
Maybe like celebrating, or maybe like the stigma of their
Of having a quinceañera.
But there are people that live here that
that
are
are having
that have
all the
these-
time.
and it kept just saying rite of passage, and it never really broke it down much more than that. And
That's
I read it a lot and was still just like,
I think that's
How
definitely
is
a
this?
question.
So why can't undocumented people?
Celebrate their traditions.
yeah, in the rite of passage sort of undocumented or unauthorized status.
I feel like maybe it's because they feel like it'll bring suspicion to themselves
But
because they see themselves as a minority.
I mean, there are people who are citizens that
It's called interrupted rite
Yeah,
of passage.
But if anyone noticed that,
Yeah,
it
and
would
like,
have to be.
and it went on to
Oh.
say like, maybe you have two unauthorized parents, and maybe it said the child grew up without knowing, like the parents didn't want to tell her.
Yeah, I read that.
Yeah, and then like the child learned about it and felt like they couldn't have a normal life, and so I was like, but what does that have to do with the rites of passage sort of thing?
Yeah, like the sad thing that I read about that in my section was that a lot of them didn't even know that they're unauthorized until they're trying to like apply for jobs or
Yeah.
for college, and I was like,
Maybe rites of passage isn't like an age rites of passage. Maybe it's like oh, you're 16 now you can have a license, or oh, you're 18 now
Stuff
you
like
can
now you
have
can
a
graduate.
That
or,
would
like,
be
get
that
a-
they could totally.
Wish they would have given examples like that instead of
That would
bar
make
mitzvah,
that makes sense.
quinceañera.
Like
You guys, I
That
really
they
have to go to
wouldn't-
the bathroom.
that they wouldn't be able to like participate in that because of.
Yeah, because
Yeah,
that would make
maybe
more
climate
sense. Like trying to
Should we
apply.
pause that?
Yeah.
Oh,